Hello fellow members of the Kriegsmarine, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for joining us for our second video on the history of the German submarine forces during the Second World War. Today's video we're going to be talking about the organization of the submarines in the Kriegsmarine during World War II. To start off with, we have our Type 2 submarine in the background there getting underway from the port of Kiel on a nice bright sunny day. Coming into view there, you see the submarine pins where the submarines would dock and receive fuel and repairs in these major ports. As a starter for the organization of the submarines, it's important to explain that the ports were themselves not in command of the submarines that were operating out of the ports. That's something that a lot of people that are not in the Navy sometimes have a hard time understanding. The ships and the offices that are located in these major ports are what's called tenant agencies. They exist in the port basically as you would if you checked into a hotel, for instance, and the port itself is not in charge of them, but the port is responsible for providing services to them. Now later on I am going to make a video explaining the organization of the entire Kriegsmarine, but just to give you some Kriegsmarine 101 about how they were basically organized, the Kriegsmarine did not have actual fleets, which is another thing that people that have served, for instance, in the U.S. Navy or the British Navy, sometimes have a hard time understanding. What the Germans did was they had geographical regions. They had a north region, a west region, a south region, and the admiral in charge of that region was pretty much like a fleet commander, and he was responsible for everything that went on in that region, including all the ships at sea, all the ships in port, all the bases, and answering to him were several Navy districts that actually controlled the shore establishments like the ports. But the actual ships and the submarines were under what was called a type commander, and they were completely separate from these operational regions that I was just talking about. And it was kind of like a two-headed monster where the two heads tried to bite each other. In some cases you had the type commanders and the group commanders work well together. In other cases you had the type commander basically did not even care what the group commander wanted, and that's pretty much what you had with the submarine forces. Now, to explain what I mean by that, we first have to talk a little bit about who this man is that you see there. That is Karl Donitz. He was the commander of all German submarine forces in the Kriegsmarine. He was later commander of the entire German Navy, and after that was briefly president of Germany after Hitler committed suicide, and he was the last leader of Germany before the surrender to the Allies and the Soviets at the end of World War II. Now, Donitz began his career as a submarine captain in the First World War. He was quite a successful submarine commander, and during the interwar years, the 1920s and the 1930s, he remained in the Navy and was a very big proponent of expanding the submarine force and having the submarine force be the predominant force in the German Navy. Now, that went against the feelings of most of the other German admirals and leaders at the time. They felt that the battleships should be the primary force, and a guy called Erich Raeder, that's him there, he was the commander-in-chief of the German Navy at the start of World War II. He operated pretty much like you would expect a knowledgeable naval officer to do so. He was an advocate of balancing the Navy with a surface fleet augmented by submarines. He also wanted to see a naval aviation branch develop, which didn't happen because the German Air Force under Hermann Göring pretty much kept all the aviation to themselves and did not want the Navy getting involved in aviation. He also did not get along that well with Donitz because Karl Donitz operated with pretty much total independence with regards to the submarine force. Donitz did not answer to the group commanders and barely answered to Raeder, and he was pretty much the sole admiral in charge of the submarines, in contrast to the many admirals that were involved in the surface fleet. Yeah, and here we are back at Kiel Harbor with our Type 2A submarine cruising along there. So to get back to the original point of the video, the organization of the submarines itself, Well, now that you know who Dönitz is, to give you a little bit of history about how Dönitz began the organization of submarines, he was originally what was called the Führer der Unterseeboote, FDU, and that translates as leader of submarines. He started that position in the mid-1930s, where he founded what was called the First Flotilla, which consisted of a small number of submarines out of Kiel. And that flotilla was the original submarine unit that Dönitz used to expand his submarine force. He was a captain at the time. He was the flotilla commander and the leader of the submarines. He later changed his titles to Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot, which basically means commander of submarines, and the first flotilla was taken over by another officer. Now, to tell you a little bit about these flotillas, they were units that were shore-based. They did not have a flagship. The flotilla commander and his staff basically just occupied a building in one of the ports, and to them answered the various submarine commanders of the individual submarines. Now that's important because the flotilla commanders did not usually go to sea. Some of them did on rare occasions for special reasons, but typically the flotilla commanders and their staffs were not the guys who went out on the submarines. That was the individual submarine commanders that usually held a rank called Kapitänleutnant, which was frequently shortened to Kaloin, which you hear a lot in submarine movies. That's the equivalent of, if you're in the U.S. Army, a captain. If you're in the U.S. Navy, a lieutenant. Carried the authority of a Navy lieutenant commander, and they were the individual submarine commanders. Now, the reason why that's important is because pretty much the safe job was at the flotillas, because you were not at sea in danger of being depth charged and killed like the submarine commanders were. So what you had happen in World War II, especially at the end of World War II, you had a lot of these submarine commanders getting killed, a lot of the flotilla commanders surviving. The flotillas themselves were divided into operational flotillas, which sent submarines out to sea to engage in combat, that sort of thing, and the training flotillas, which were designed to stay in safe waters and train new crews to then transfer to the combat flotillas. There was also one flotilla group that deployed to the Pacific. It was called the Monsoon Group. That is a pretty complicated situation where the Germans attempted to deploy some of their submarines to help the Japanese. It turned out that it was somewhat successful, but the Germans and the Japanese did not ever conduct any joint type of operations, which is what the attempt was with that Monsoon Group. But back to the flotillas back in Europe. It started with one and grew to about 7 of them by the time World War II began. And by the time World War II was over, you had a total of 33 flotillas. The vast majority of them were located in France during the occupation. They're the ones that you hear a lot about. They were the ones that went out and attacked the Allied shipping. That the flotilla out of La Rochelle and the flotilla out of Brest have been portrayed in a lot of movies about submarines. And after the Germans withdrew from France, they established several late war flotillas up in Norway and in northern Germany around Denmark. There was a very significant one at Flensburg, which was where the headquarters of Dönitz was at the end of the war. Now, the map you see coming up there, that is a listing, or excuse me, a display of all the flotillas, where they were located. The gray flotillas are the training, the white flotillas are the operational. Now, the gold boxes you see there were what were called the U-boat regions, and there has not been too much written about these, and you hardly ever hear them mentioned in films and things like that, because they were a type of liaison command between the group commanders and the local flotillas, so that Dönitz would have some type of cooperation with the operational forces of the German Navy, instead of being kind of the lone wolf that he wanted to be. Now, the regional commanders were usually very senior U-boat officers. In modern day in American Navy, they would have like the rank of commander or captain. They too did not go out to sea with the U-boats. They stayed on shore assignments and oversaw the various flotillas, and they would report the flotilla activities to the Navy group commanders. The guy you see there is Hans Rudolf Rosing. He was the U-boat region commander for Region West, which was the region that was headquartered in Paris, France, and was responsible for the U-boat flotillas that were launching boats into the Atlantic for the Battle of the Atlantic, which was the primary main area of operation of the U-boats for most of World War II. It's also the area that you see most often in films. Predominantly, my favorite, most often mentioned film, Dust Boat, was about a U-boat that deployed out of La Rochelle, part of the 7th flotilla, or excuse me, I think it was part of the 13th flotilla actually. And this guy, this Hans Rudolf Rosing, was the regional commander that oversaw all the flotillas in France. He at the time was a Capitaine Jourset, which is a full captain 06 in the U.S. military, and he was a veteran flotilla commander. He had actually commanded 4 different flotillas before he was made the regional commander for Region West. And coincidentally, after the war, he was one of the founders of the West German Navy, where he became a rear admiral. So here we are back with our little submarine. Looks like he's almost out of the harbor there, getting underway. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's very easy when you see submarine movies to think of this closed world of inside the submarine as its own world, and it's sometimes hard to remember that these submarine commanders did have to answer to people. Those people had to answer to people, and especially in the German Navy, they did pay a lot of attention to what these individual submarines did. The flotilla commanders were not simply desk-bound people who did not have any operational experience. They were combat veterans themselves, and Dönitz, from what we have heard about him as a person, was a very strict kind of taskmaster who did not take a lot of BS from people when it came to what he was being told. He did hold the flotilla and the regional commanders personally responsible if things were not going well in their area of expertise. So there was a much broader organization to consider with these submarines. So thanks again for joining us. I hope you found this video interesting. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you'd like to see more videos or have specific questions about a World War II topic, please leave a note in the comments. Thank you.